Hey everybody, welcome to Dell's DIY, and today I'm going to show you how I made this Kreg workstation with storage. The reason why I wanted to do this is I do a lot of pocket holes with large panels. It's just a little frustrating to balance large panels on just this blue Kreg jig. What I've been finding I have to do is I'm always putting 3/4 inch plywood somewhere on the workbench and trying balancing them. So I figured this is going to be the solution, and I'm really excited to share it with you.
Before we get too far in, I just want to say I recorded this video 2 years ago and never released it because I didn't think it was good enough. So many of you have asked for these plans after seeing me use the workstation in previous videos. I decided to let go of any insecurity I had and post it anyway. So here it is. And in all honesty, the video is pretty dang good, so I'm glad I did this. I started by breaking down the 1/2 inch plywood and cut the parts out on the table saw. As you can see, I had no fancy tools like a track saw or miter station with stop blocks. So if you're just starting out and at least have a table saw, you can complete this project. The plans, which are available in the links below, show in detail the dimensions of each part I'm cutting out here. I also want to note that this workstation is designed specifically for use with the Kreg K4 pocket hole jig, which is by far the most popular jig system that has been around for years. If you're using a different pocket hole jig or a newer version of the Kreg pocket hole jig, these plans can easily be updated to accommodate them. I was not lying that I did not have a miter station at this point. In fact, I'm using a Harbor Freight miter saw that was purchased for around $50, and by using some scrap pieces of plywood, I screwed them to the fence, which gave me a little more work surface to work with. And then I clamped on a piece of scrap wood, which created a stop block to make repeatable cuts. Here I'm cutting the sides for the storage boxes. And when you're done, you have a heap of wood that looks like absolutely nothing. But now is when the real fun begins. We have to mark out all of the angles that make up the base of the workstation. Once we're done making the marks, we connect all the dots with a straight edge and a 45-degree carpenter square. The last thing we have to mark out is the location of the handle. Here I'm marking the center point of where 1-inch circles are going to be drawn to make the curve of the handle. Next, we get to cut out the workstation base along the lines that we just created. If you have a track saw, I would definitely use it at this point. I used my miter gauge and played with the angle until the lines lined up with the saw blade, and then made my cuts with the table saw. It actually worked out great, but it did take some time for the setup. Next, we cut out the handle, starting by making some relief holes with a drill, just to give us some room for the jigsaw blade to maneuver around. I unfortunately used a dull blade here, and as you can see, it was a bit of a struggle, but I cleaned it up later in the next step. If you need to clean up your cut and you don't have a spindle sander, you can use some sandpaper rolled around a dowel or a rasp or a file. They're all going to work the same. Finally, I cleaned up the edges with an 1/8 inch roundover bit. While I had the router and the roundover bit out, I added a roundover along the top edge of the storage box lids, just to soften the feel of them. And before we start attaching the storage box sides, I did a very light sanding, being very careful not to sand through the thin veneer. It only seems fitting to use pocket holes to put the storage box together. Here we're going to be attaching the sides to one another with pocket holes, as well as attaching the assembled storage box to the workstation base. Once we're done drilling all the pocket holes, now we get to assemble the project. I find it's helpful to use a 23 gauge pin nailer just to hold the pieces in place, so when you're inserting the pocket hole screws, the pieces don't shift on you. In addition to the pin nails and the pocket hole screws, I did use wood glue on the joints. It just gives me that little extra feeling of security. I don't know. Maybe it's not needed. I did my best to make sure the boxes were going together as square as possible. A little trick that I learned here is before the glue is dry and after you put in your last pocket hole screw from the side, go ahead and attach the entire box to the workstation base. With the glue still being wet, you can easily square it up and screw it into the base all at the same time. I tried two different methods when attaching the sides of the storage box to the workstation base. Here I'm using a strap clamp, which I don't think I would actually recommend. The second option, I used some clamps and clamped on a carpenter square in the corner while the sides were still wet, and it went in nice and easy. I was able to square it up and then follow up with pocket hole screws going into the base, and it worked out pretty great. And before I forget, I, of course, used some wood glue as well, in addition to the pocket hole screws. We are almost done. Cue the dramatic music. I added a couple 1/4 inch dividers in one of the storage boxes just to keep organized with my bits and adapters and things so they're not rolling around inside the box. And now I thought was a good time to just do a test fit of the jig support pieces as well as the storage box lids, just wanting to make sure that everything fit as expected. The only part of this project that may take a little math on your side when using the plans is this part, and that is to make sure that the top of the Kreg jig is perfectly flush with the top of the boxes. Depending on how perfectly you cut your pieces, as well as if you're using actual 1/2-inch plywood versus undersized 1/2-inch plywood, which is usually 15-30 seconds instead of actually a 1/2 inch. Everything worked out great here. Now I can move on to finishing. Before attaching all of the hardware for the hinges and the latches, I decided to put a couple coats of water-based poly on the project, mainly just to protect it from moisture, as this is going to be stored in my garage. To attach the lids to the boxes, I'm using 1-inch surface mount hinges. Here I'm using a centering bit just to pre-drill some holes for the screws to avoid cracking the wood. I chose to hand tighten the screws to make sure I didn't strip out the holes, and I even added a drop of CA glue on the threads of the screw just to give it a little extra holding power. I followed the same method when attaching the latches. I pre-drilled the holes, applied a drop of CA glue on the screw, and hand tightened each of the screws. And finally, we're ready to attach the Kreg K4 jig. Last but not least, I added a hole on the edge just to be able to hang the whole workstation on the wall when not in use. I really love how this ended up turning out. It is extremely useful and efficient, and I really love having everything organized and in one place, such as my drill bits, the screws, the plugs, the dust collection adapters. And I even incorporated a little cheat sheet telling me what size screw to use on the material that I'm screwing together. Using the jig with long boards is no problem at all anymore. Making drawer boxes is a cinch. Go ahead and let me know in the comments below, what is your favorite project to use pocket holes on? Are you building cabinets? Are you building furniture? It doesn't matter. I'm interested in hearing what you guys are doing.
Hopefully you guys liked this video. If you did, please don't forget to hit subscribe and press that like button. I can't wait to share with you other projects we have coming. I also look forward to hearing your feedback below. If you would have done something different, or if you really enjoyed something, let us know. If you have any questions, I will respond as well. Thank you very much. See you next time.